This Black History Month, we are recognizing Black leaders who helped build and shape our city. Marvin Arrington Sr. has been a fixture in Atlanta politics since the late 1960s, yet many say that he's one of the least recognized. He was born in Atlanta in the 40s, at the time a segregated town of the Deep South, but he helped to transform it into the city that we know and love today. There is a new documentary highlighting his life and his work.
Marvin Arrington Sr. was one of the founding fathers of Atlanta, of modern Atlanta.
We all know the story of Dr. Martin Luther King and so many other civil rights leaders who've called Atlanta home. But for us in Atlanta, we have to remember that Marvin's name has to be called in that same way.
And Marvin fought the fight.
He was one of the major players, the barrier breaker.
He built one of the largest African-American firms here in the United States, and nobody gave him anything. He built it from scratch.
I'm so pleased that Adelin Gasana, the filmmaker, and Marvin Arrington Jr., his son and Fulton County Commissioner, are with us to talk about Bow Legs. Bow Legs is the movie. Maybe we start with the name, Bow Legs.
Bow Legs is his lifelong nickname. He had it since his early days as a high school football star and turned college star. And he, you know, the affirmation, bow legs, whatnot, and that's how it grew on him, and it became a legendary name for him, especially the work that he's done over time.
You said people just call him Bo.
Yes, they've even shortened the nickname for the nickname, right? Just Bo, and all his friends, everyone, and even Governor Barnes comments in the movie, you know, after he was practicing law and on the city council, and Governor Barnes said, well, Marvin, why are they calling you Bo? And he said, oh, it's because of my bow legs.
Bow Legs is the movie, and the list of people in it is so impressive, from Roy Barnes to former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Kasim Reed and many, many others. Just speaks to the depth of the impact your father had. But as I mentioned earlier, his name may not be as recognized.
Well, you're right. I think a lot of times the mayors get a lot of the credit, but there has to be someone to lead the legislative side, the legislative effort. And so he served as city council president under Maynard Jackson, under Andrew Young, under Maynard again, and under Bill Campbell for 16 years. So from 81 to 97, he was on the city council president, but he was first elected in 1968. To the Board of Aldermen before they even switched over to the city council. So he has had a long, good run.
Shirley Franklin and Keisha Lance Bottoms said that he should be called among the greats of our city.
What Marvin Arrington Sr. represents is the post-civil rights stalwarts of the city of Atlanta, and really in what we call the Deep South politics. And there was a time where Atlanta had to make a direction. What direction are you going to go? Are we going to continue with the segregated racist past, or are we going to make a straight on head to the cosmopolitan diversity that we have today? And so Marvin Arrington Sr. is those leaders who comes in the same generation as Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young turned activist to politician, and really puts the pieces together. They enact policy. They really are the kind of forward thinkers who's bringing white people and black people to the table and saying, we're better than our past. And that vision of going forward was really what propped them and the work that they've done. And today we see the results.
And very significant that you're saying this, because your father was among the first two to integrate Emory Law School.
Yeah.
And that was a very difficult, he faced a lot of racism, he faced very challenging things, yet he was someone who wanted to bring people together.
At that time, there were no black law school students at Emory University.
Just think about the courage that it took to walk into a place where there had never been one like you, and knowing the resentment and the hatred that they must have felt.
Atlanta was still a segregated city, even though the Civil Rights Act had passed, the Voting Rights Act had passed.
Which was probably the worst period in Atlanta's history, sort of like the Berlin Wall, right across Peyton Road, to abort any ownership by black folks coming.
Oddly enough, at that time, the University of Georgia would pay for your school as long as you signed an affidavit saying that you wouldn't go to the University of Georgia. So he signed the affidavit, went off to Howard Law School for his first year of college, but was kind of homesick and wanted to come home, and was visiting Emory Law School in the summer, ran into the dean of the Emory Law School and convinced his friend Clarence Cooper to transfer with him, Judge Clarence Cooper, because he didn't want to go be there by himself. And so they made that decision, and the rest is history, as they say.
Did he tell you stories about his time and all that he endured?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's one of those things, you know how parents are. They tell you the same things over and over again. And eventually it gets ingrained in. And so, you know, just amazing stories. His first day after being elected, going into City Hall, they still had separate water fountains, colored and white water fountains. And he went directly to the white water fountain and started drinking and said, I dare someone to say something to me.
Yeah. And to add to that, part of what we were doing with this documentary as we're in the scripting phase was, while this is a biopic, while this is a biographical documentary, we also believe that Marvin Arrington Sr.'s story parallels so harmoniously to the growth of the city. As you mentioned in your intro, he's a Grady baby, grew up in Grady Homes housing projects and moved into the Bluff. So he's born in this poor black neighborhood of a segregated town. And then as he enters politics, enters the fray, and then helps build what the city is today, it's now an international city. So it tells you so much of what fertile ground Atlanta was, right? And up into the mid-1960s, Atlanta's moniker was the city too busy to hate. And again, it tells you that forward-thinking individuals, blacks and whites on both sides of the aisle, said and say, you know what, we're not the Jackson, Mississippis, we're not the Birmingham, Alabamas. We are going to chart a new destiny for what we think the city can be, and then therefore here's the results of that.
And all he did to shape the city that we know to be true now, from MARTA to bringing the Olympics here to really fighting for equitable housing, you name it, he was part of the issues that were important then and continue to be important now.
Absolutely, he helped save the zoo. Very integral with it was, I guess at that point it was the Atlanta Zoo, and now changed to Zoo Atlanta, and that the work there, his work with the Olympics and the Olympic Committee, the airport, all contributions again that made the city of Atlanta what it is today, and the reason that we are all so proud to call Atlanta home.
What do you think his greatest hope was for the city in the early years, and maybe his hope for the city now? He just celebrated a birthday last week. You know, he's still very much involved and knows the heartbeat of the city.
Well, you know, I think he was elected in November of 1968 after the assassination of Dr. King in April of '68. So his election was a way to be involved in civil rights, and he went to law school because they believed that the law was the way to make sure that everyone had their civil rights. And so I think he would be very proud of where we are today. I know he is very proud of where the city of Atlanta is today and where we're going. You know, we've got a great mayor, Andre Dickens. He's doing a wonderful job. Great city council and great people working. So a lot of it is really aspirational, right? It's what are you thinking? Where are we going? And so I think we're on the right track, and I believe that he thinks we're on the right track as well.
How Atlanta got to be the Atlanta that it is today is because of the blood, sweat, tears, sacrifice, and service of political giants like Marvin Arrington Sr.
You know, both of my parents taught me that service is the rent that we pay for our life on this earth. And so to that extent, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so they always taught me and my sister that it's important to give back to others. And so we have just, I guess that's part of our DNA.
Yeah, no doubt. I know he's very proud of that. The documentary does a beautiful job at looking at the full array of experiences. In 2002, former Governor Roy Barnes appointed him to the Fulton County Superior Court bench. And there was a national story that came out of that when he cleared the courtroom one day to talk to some young African-American men, but sort of the narrative was that he cleared the white people out of the courtroom. You talk about that in the movie.
Yes.
As judge, he cleared the courtroom of everyone but just young black men. But I said, hell, that's classic Marvin. And when there was this backlash, I couldn't understand it.
Here's a judge who takes the pulpit he has and wants to speak directly to his community. And given his background, he's from the same streets that these individuals are appearing in front of him. And he's saying, get yourself together. And so it's kind of off the cuff, informal way of speaking as a judge. And interesting enough, the backlash he was getting at the national media for this event, he was getting a lot of kudos in the street. I mean, in the neighborhood, people would come and pot him and say,
yeah, he became the grocery store hero. Everybody was patting him on the back. Great job. I'm glad that you did that. Yeah. In fact, a judge in Cobb County actually said to me, white judge in Cobb County, said to me when I appeared before his in court, he said, hey, tell your dad hello. I wish I could have done the same thing, but it probably wouldn't have been received the same way. Yes. So while there was this national backlash and national talking points, I guess, I think most people understood his real intent and that his heart was in a good place.
Yeah, he wanted to speak man to man with those young men.
Yes, and that's kind of the leitmotif in Marvin Arrington Sr.'s biography, is that he is not your formal politician, if you will. He was, even in his days as Board of Aldermen, he was kind of the unusual councilman, right? He had his ear to the streets. He knew the everyday neighborhood, but he was so well, he was in the way of moving from champagne to sneakers, as it was called in the document, right? Mm-hmm. He can appear at a boardroom in Buckhead, but then also a barbershop in Bankhead. Mm-hmm. And that uniqueness would not carried him all the way through, and so it doesn't surprise anybody who knows him that he can go from a politician to become a judge and still speak off the cuff. I mean, it's classic Marvin, right? Mm-hmm. It's to his character to the T.
Well, and because he's a Grady baby and grew up here and knows the city and understands in a way that you can only know if you've experienced that life from the beginning on, that gave him an authority to talk to the kids.
Yes.
And I want to add one more thing to Marvin Arrington's imprint and impact on the city. Atlanta grew from its days in the post-civil rights into what's called the Black Mecca. And here's where I think Atlanta can be somewhat relevant in the national story or whatnot, particularly for the Black American experience. Chain migration drove a lot of African Americans up north to escape Jim Crow South. And then all of a sudden, Maynard Jackson is elected in 1973, the first black mayor of a major southern city. Black businesses is booming. Black entrepreneurship, black politicians, Marvin Arrington Sr. are being more representative to give back to enact city law in equal favor. All of a sudden, Atlanta becomes the place to be. It becomes the Mecca. And so then you start seeing a trickle down of African Americans outside coming to the city. And of course, with the HBCU tradition that we have here, Atlanta becomes this gateway to the South, if you will. And that really brings the whole inspiration and aspiration to this story, is that here's what Atlanta was, and then slowly as it evolved and how relevant it is today.
And when we talk about trailblazers, if it hadn't been for some of those trailblazers saying, we're going to go to Emory, we're going to do this, we're going to pursue politics in those early days, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Yes, and you know, so interesting to note, he was a graduate of Turner High School class of 1959, along with Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter Galt, who actually integrated the University of Georgia. And so I think it was just something in the water, right? It was something in the air, something in the water that had this spirit and of inclusion and making sure that everyone was being treated fairly.
Yes, the ground was fertile in that regard. And something that we mentioned in our screenings and our Q&As is that the documentary is entitled Bow Legs, Marvin Arrington Sr., an Atlanta story. And it really highlights how there's so many more of these type of stories, right? Like he just said, the Hamilton Holmes story. That really, we're in an age where the documentary film has much more of an impact as far as the endearing impact, as far as informing and teaching those who may not know these stories in a more erudite way than in book form. And so that's why it's important to tell these type of stories, right? The Ralph Abernathy story has yet to be told on document. Andrew Young's story has yet to be told. So there's a lot of these stories that really, Leroy Johnson included, where they talk about these trailblazers. And it's just really just highlighting these stories and getting it out there. And for us to be able to be on Delta Airlines for 6 months or not really elevated the status of the documentary, so many people came back and said, I didn't know anything about Marvin Arrington Sr.'s story. Thank you. You know, and those are the kind of ways we get these stories out.
Yeah, it's so important to understand on whose shoulders this city has been built.
You know, oftentimes we do documentaries on leaders and impactful trailblazers. It's usually after the fact. This is when they're long gone. And to be able to do this documentary while Marvin Arrington Sr. is still with us resonates even greater, and that we can give them their flowers, commemorate them while they're still here with us. And I think for me, it's the more rewarding thing as far as our completion of this film.
No doubt. For him to really see this now, what was his reaction when he saw it for the first time?
Well, he actually loved the movie, and he's been getting phone calls every day from friends and people all around the country who've seen it on Delta or elsewhere, just telling them how much they enjoyed it. And so it has really brought complete joy to him to be celebrated and remembered in this fashion.
Yeah.
And to take 40, 50 years of his life into 2 hours. That's a task.
He's like, there's a few stories you left out, but that's okay. Just a few. Thank you both so much for your time. I've enjoyed talking to you about it, and congratulations on a beautifully made and very important film.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anywhere you stream, you can find it right now.
Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and YouTube is your go-tos.
We really encourage people to take the time to watch it. You will learn a lot, and you'll be inspired.
Dirty, dirty. Oh, Atlanta. Going to praise.